So can you set up what exactly Biden just decided to do, and what also led him to this decision, like what the context is?
The context is that when the US pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban came into power over the whole country in August, the Biden administration immediately imposed unilateral sanctions against the Taliban and froze the Taliban's assets. That was $7 billion in the Federal Reserve in the United States. And then he advised the other countries that were holding assets, total of $2 billion in Europe and the United Arab Emirates, as well as IMF and World Bank money that was going to go to Afghanistan. And he said to put a hold on all of that. So you can imagine when a country that was dependent on 75% of its public expenditures were coming from the outside, that dried up. And then the legs were pulled out from the economy. And I would liken it to an economic blockade, because it really meant that Afghanistan could not participate in the international economic system, but also it meant that internally it didn't have the funds it needed for the basic functioning of an economy. So people couldn't get their savings out of the bank. Businesses couldn't get money to pay salaries. The government didn't have the money needed to pay hundreds of thousands of public servants. And you can imagine the repercussions of this with the rising hunger and the rising inflation, prices of food and fuel. Also experienced a very terrible drought this year, and now a very harsh winter. So you put all of that together and you have a massive economic collapse in Afghanistan, and Biden really being responsible for a large part of that, taking revenge for having lost a 20-year battle against the Taliban, taking revenge out on the ordinary Afghan people. And so we started this group Unfreeze Afghanistan when we were approached by a group of about 40,000 teachers, women, who said, well, it's all very well and good that you want the Taliban to allow girls to go to school, but if we're not getting paid our salaries, that's not very helpful. And so we started working to try to get these different entities to release the money. And we've been doing that now for 6 months. And the final wrench in this whole thing came on Friday when Biden issued an executive order that said, okay, we're going to take these frozen funds, and instead of returning it back to the central bank so that Afghanistan could have a chance at a functioning, sustainable economy, we're going to divide it in two. One half of it to be used as possible compensation for lawsuits that 9/11 families have brought against the Taliban for having sheltered Al-Qaeda, and the other to be used to go to the Afghan people in some way that we're not sure about. Originally, we thought it was going to be through international organizations for humanitarian aid, which we were opposed to because we thought this money really has to go for shoring up the economy, not for humanitarian aid. There's other monies that have to be raised for that. Now the administration is walking back a bit and saying, well, we're not sure how that $3.5 billion is going to be used. In any case, you know what? It's not Biden's money. It's not this administration's money. It's not the United States money. It's the money of the people of Afghanistan. So we've been very much against the freezing the funds, and now we're against Biden saying that he can somehow, in a very dictatorial or imperial manner, decide where Afghans' money is going to be dispersed.
Yeah, it's really quite disgusting and on so many levels. And I think that what's interesting is that the 9/11 families payment, it makes no sense. But even if you thought it would, I mean, it's interesting that there are 9/11 families who are speaking out against this, as you guys cite in your article. Barry Admonson, who lost his brother in the 9/11 attack and is part of the group called 9/11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, is advocating against Biden's decision. Quote, "We can't bring our loved ones back, but we can save the lives of people in Afghanistan by advocating that the Biden administration release this money to its rightful owners, the Afghan people." I mean, it's just such a sick thing to do, to pit together people whose family members were killed in 9/11 and people who are just trying to survive in Afghanistan, whose only crime was being born and living in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we were concerned about the increasing rate of poverty. We had at one point gotten it down to the mid 30 percentile, and then it started going steadily up the last few years, with a drawdown in aid to Afghanistan and just a drawdown of the military presence, because a lot of that economy was built. There was a military industrial complex that the country was feeding off of, and a lot of contracts, a lot of supply contracts and others. So in addition to just bad management by the previous government, led to an increase in the poverty rate. And we were watching this saying, this is really getting bad. It went to 60%, then it went to 70%. COVID hit, brought it up to 70%. And then people were not getting paid in the healthcare sector. Teachers were not getting paid. And everything seemed to be getting worse. And one had to question what the government's previous government's priorities were, because when they came to meet President Biden, instead of asking for food aid, they were asking for, helicopters and weapons. And that became even more concerning to me. We welcomed President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. The war, 20 years is a really long time. It's America's longest war. And the people of Afghanistan just need to get on with their lives. For them, it's been 43 years of this. And so that was a welcome thing to happen. But then when you took the troops out and you take out 75% of the country's budget, and then all of these other, by the way, healthcare and education projects were externally funded, meaning by donors off the budget. So like 75% of the health clinics were not operational suddenly in the middle of, let me explain, COVID, a pandemic. You have a famine within a pandemic. You have the collapse of the previous government. You have the worst drought in 35 years and the end of a 43-year war. It's worse than the Great Depression. It's happening faster. And then on top of that, you seize a country's assets. And people think, okay, well, if I can't get money out of the bank today, maybe, they wait in line for, 10 hours, days, 2 days, 3 days. Sometimes they get to the teller and they can't withdraw. It was $200 max per month before. Now it's $400. But by the time they get there, the bank doesn't have the money. You maybe get $100. The provincial bank branches are shutting down because they don't have money. People who have worked their whole lives and were told, hey, we have a modern banking system now. This is what the international experts that came into Afghanistan told them. Put your money in the bank, take it out of the mattress. This is part of becoming a modern country. And then they are now in a position when they're experiencing this collapse and they're trying to get on with their lives, and they can't even withdraw their savings from the bank. This is what we've done to these people. And it's resulted in 22 million people starving through one of the worst famines in history, and 1 million children expected to die this winter. It is so awful what is happening to this country. I mean, to them, this is worse than the 20 years of war. Actually, our economic sanctions, freezing up their banking system, seizing their central bank assets, as you don't have to take it from me, Dr. Paul Spiegel, who's an expert from Johns Hopkins, went over with the WHO, and he came back and said, we're going to kill more people due to these economic sanctions than the Taliban ever killed in the 20 years of war, than the US has killed, in fact. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do with this country? How do we want to treat these people? I understand that we were at war with them, but we are not at war anymore. We need to think about how to stabilize Afghanistan. we need to think about what is good for the Afghan people so that we don't create more enemies in Afghanistan.